Throughout history, man has strived for perfection, conquering the land, the sea, and even nature. The only thing man had left to conquer was man itself. To become the perfect being was to be human, and to be human was now to be imperfect. With time, man has tried to change the course of their own evolution by purging the weak and catering to the elite. Social stratification was in itself a way for humanity to separate the superior people from those less fortunate. Within the great Spartan Empire, for example, the strong were selected from birth, as crippled and sick children were killed in the Spartans' endeavor to cultivate the perfect warrior. Within 1377, man attempted to classify the strong from the weak in what was known as environmental determinism. According to Ibn Khaldun, founder of environmental determinism, culture, language, and the institutions of a group of people are a product of climate, and thus lifestyle is a direct adaptation to climate. Stemming from environmental determinism, degeneracy theory was founded in the 1700s and suggests that environmental factors may damage the heredity of an individual, implying that certain people living in certain climates are physically inferior to other groups of people living in favorable climates. Friedrich Ratzel of Germany later adopted the principle of degeneracy theory and added to environmental determinism that environments were a sole reason for a civilization's success. Ratzel argued that hot and humid climates gave rise to degenerates, and that man's contact with temperate environments evolved them further into a more productive population. Friedrich Ratzel cites the success of European empires, such as those of the Holy Roman Empire, and contrasts it to the failures of the Ottoman Empire as well as the collapse of the Chinese Empire. Both environmental determinism and degeneracy theory were prominent into the late 19th and early 20th centuries and served as a means of identifying perfect individuals from the flawed masses, or vice versa. With the rise of Mendelian genetics in 1863, establishing something tangible of which determines variance within the essence of life, humanity had better reason to suspect that perfection was dictated by formulaic principle. In theory, one could achieve the best man from creation and manipulation. There indeed was some kind of a factor that determines an individual's place in the environment. It was only a matter of time after this discovery that people tried to use science to manipulate these heritable factors to result in the perfect race. Francis Galton, cousin of Charles Darwin and founder of the science of eugenics in 1883, he was inspired by this almost universally accepted revelation. In eugenics, two models existed to achieve maximum fitness within the human race, proposing that people carry various traits of which make up the individual, and those of lesser and inferior heritable factors were to be isolated and culled in order to contribute to the fitness of humanity, a policy known as negative eugenics, which most of the world favored over positive eugenics. In positive eugenics, the healthiest individuals were often encouraged to bear the most offspring to overshadow the weak. Criminals, dissidents, heretics, and outcasts, all of whom were called degenerates, were deemed to be a product of bad heredity. Ultimately, the ideas of eugenics became immensely popular throughout the Western Hemisphere, most notably during the years preceding World War I. Adherents of eugenics and that of the degeneracy theory, such as Richard Dugdale, believed that individuals suffering from botched heredity can otherwise be cured of lameness by exposing them to the superior environments of Northern Europe in no less than 3 subsequent generations. In the 1880s, however, August Weismann repealed the findings of Richard Dugdale by proposing that changes induced to flawed individuals had little to no effect on the tissue of the gonads, coined germplasm by Weismann. In short, there was no chance for these stunted individuals to redeem themselves, and they must never be able to contribute to the gene pool. As a result of Weismann's findings, all degenerates were to become sterilized. Enacted in 1907 within the United States of America, it had become law that these degenerates were to undergo compulsory vasectomies in prison.
What's a vasectomy?
I'll tell you when you're older.
With eugenics being practiced by the German and American superpowers, Japan adopted the idea of the selection of genes in its rapid westernization following the Meiji Restoration. Nationalist movement of the Yamato people, or the main ethnic group of Japan, fueled Japan's need for technological and social superiority. And among the ideas proposed by the National Diet, Japan is only for the pure-blooded Japanese. From the late 19th century to the mid-20th century, Japan instigated various eugenics policies that sought to increase homogeneous nature of the Japanese population, as well as eliminating individuals afflicted with mental retardation, disability, and various genetic diseases from the gene pool. Immigration from other adjacent countries such as Korea and China were limited and even outlawed, as individuals from these sovereignties were and still are viewed as subhuman by the Japanese. On December 21st, as of 1928, the day was to be known as Blood Purity Day, in which individuals had their blood tested to determine whether or not these people in question were Japanese. Unlike conventional eugenics, Japan based its politics off of one's appearance, showing little to no interest in the science of actual genetics. In addition to Japan, within Scandinavia, along with the Nazis, eugenics was widely practiced in an attempt to unify the Nordic population, all of whom were deemed to be the perfect race. Implemented in the 1930s, Scandinavian eugenics laws lasted very well into the mid-1970s. Particularly mentally unfit women were targeted by the eugenics program and were sterilized en masse. Immigration was limited by the government and mental anomalies within the Nordic population. Unlike other eugenics programs, Scandinavian eugenics policy was heavily oriented around society and its implications on life. People were not required to become sterilized due to bad heredity, but they were often discriminated by the masses and eventually caved into pressure. About 60,000 women were disallowed to bear children in Northern Europe as a direct result of their mental capacity. What is seen here is that homogeneous populations are more likely to incorporate eugenic programs into the law of the land.
Finally, China has run the longest and most successful eugenics program in the history of the modern world. After Mao Zedong's death in 1976, Deng Xiaoping succeeded in the ruling order and proposed that Communist China should shift its focus on economic affairs to population policies. In doing so, China implemented its one-child policy shortly after Xiaoping rose to power in order to impede China's population explosion and reduce dysgenic fertility amongst the proletariats, all of which were considered to be flawed genetic composition. Xiaoping preached that children should be born later, longer, fewer, and better, putting emphasis on the individualism of maternal care. With this, Xiaoping acknowledged the fact that there existed a social dichotomy within Communist China and that the expansion of the upper class was paramount. Women were urged to get mandatory ultrasounds resulting in the detection of birth defects in mothers, therefore allowing doctors to remove flawed individuals from the gene pool before birth. As with other eugenic programs, individuals with genetic and mental ailments were forbidden to marry and contributed to the gene pool of the PRC. In the recent years, China has employed more into genomic research on human and mental traits than anywhere in the world, employing more than 4,000 workers in firms such as BGI Shenzhen. Genomic research such as that found in BGI are invested into finding the links between intelligence, status, and wealth with various alleles in a human genomic sequencing, all for the purpose of terminating embryos that do not meet the status quo of the intelligence allele.